I'm Leslie Hines, and I am chair of Scottish Co-operative Party. And we're here tonight to launch the cooperative direction for Scotland, and particularly looking at our policy document for the 2026 Scottish Parliament elections. And we will have 3 speakers this evening who will deal with each of some of the topics. There are a number of topics in policy document, and we're hoping, and I'm sure we will ensure that our cooperative party document will be in the Scottish Labour Party's manifesto coming up for the Scottish Parliament elections. And it's really important the Scottish Cooperative Party has an influence in terms of the Scottish Parliament going forward after the elections in 2026. So first of all, I'd like pleased to be joined by Claire Baker, MSP, for the Fife area, and a fellow cooperative. And over to you, Claire, to take one of the topics in the policy document.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you to everyone who's attending this evening. I'm here to say a bit about renewable energy and the importance of cooperative models and how we move forward on our journey towards net zero. I'm a cooperative MSP for Mid Scotland and Fife, and I've been in the Parliament since 2007, and I'm standing in the election that's coming up. So if we think about how this has developed in Scotland, we are, I feel, in many ways behind in terms of our cooperative models compared to other European countries, certainly. And I think the pace at which the UK government are moving through GB Energy and the local power plans is at risk of leaving us a bit behind as well. We do have some, positive examples of district heating networks and where we have cooperative models and ownership of renewable projects, but in my region there's very few, particularly in Fife. We don't have that much. I think there's scope for much more expansion, and the benefits of it that it brings to communities to have control over their energy and have control over production is about empowering communities. And we all know the pressures people are under in terms of their fuel bills and energy costs and the reliance that we still have on imports, and the commitment of the UK government to try and move away from that. And while the commercial side of that is important for the scale that we need, there is much more space for growth within renewable and ownership and community ownership. And it's how do we deliver that? And I really welcome the document that's come from the Scottish Cooperative Party and how it can influence our manifesto going forward for the election in May. And they have some kind of clear policy asks around the funding for the community and renewable energy scheme, which is the CARE scheme, which has been popular. But as I said at the start, I think the UK government have been kind of clearer in that it's a clear ambition to increase community ownership, and there's a plan to make it happen. I don't feel as an MSP for the past few years that we've really kind of seen that plan and drive and direction in Scotland. And I know the UK government have signed up to agreements with some regional authorities and some mayoral authorities, and we're just not seeing that kind of ambition and drive in Scotland. And there is an opportunity for us in the next Parliament to really drive that. And one of the ways that could be done as well to make it quicker and easier for people to access it, because when community groups have got involved in community ownership of energy, it is often quite an onerous process. It can be quite lengthy. It can be sometimes expensive. I know the Co-op Party are talking about a development support fund, a new pot of money that would be there to help groups start to bring forward a proposal. And when I was on the Economy and Fair Work Committee, we looked at town centres and community ownership, and you can apply the same kind of logic to that. And one of the things we found there, that we looked at Dumfries, and while they've made great progress in Dumfries around the quarter, and they've taken over some buildings, and there's real drive there, the difficulties in initially getting started, a kind of pot of money just to get you started and to bring together feasibility plans and have an understanding of what's needed to actually bring a project to fruition, was the same need there as what there is in the renewable sector. And so that's something I'm supportive of, that we see a kind of pot to help people forward, a kind of early stage development plan. And also it's interesting they're talking about offshore leasing rounds that we should have. I think it's in Denmark, they have a percentage that has to go to community projects, and that is something that we should be looking at in Scotland. We know in the papers recently there's issues around Scotland and the money that came from those leasing rounds that maybe hasn't, it would have been ideal if the money from the Scotland leasing rounds was put into energy projects that would benefit people and communities and bring ownership closer to them. And that doesn't appear that's what's happened. It looks like it's gone into the Scottish budget to meet shortfalls in the budget around various policy areas. And really, I think in future we should be looking at how do we use any kind of benefits that come to Scotland from leasing rounds to really drive forward ownership and more cooperative models. And I think Denmark, who seem to be leading in a lot of this, Denmark also have really strong district heating networks that are based on cooperative models and ownership. So it would be positive to see that kind of developed more in Scotland. And also there's work around, because it's not just about energy ownership. Scotland has a huge challenge in terms of retrofitting and making sure that people's houses and properties and commercial that other kind of buildings, public buildings, are more resilient and they're more heat efficient. And so you could be looking at how do we support community energy groups, ones that are maybe already established, or newer ones, to also look at what they could contribute towards retrofitting and how they can maybe introduce cooperative models into the delivery of that. And I just feel that in Scotland we have, while we have the government have given some support to community and cooperative models, but I think there could be a much greater focus across, I'm talking about renewable energy, and other members here will talk about other areas. But I think if we were to have more cooperative MSPs elected to Parliament, we could work together, which we do already, but we could strengthen the case for cooperative models, and we can look at where there has been positive examples in Scotland. How can you replicate that? Because we can always point to where it's worked well, but it doesn't seem to then be expanded and invested in as promoted as solutions. And surely energy and our move towards net zero is one of the biggest challenges that we face as a country. And I think there are solutions in cooperative models, and I really welcome the policy platform that's come forward this evening. And, as the cooperative MSPs, we will talk about how we can make sure it ends up in Scottish manifestos. And it's good to see that Anna Sarwar, our leader, is doing the introduction to the document that's published this week. And I think that shows our level of commitment to finding cooperative solutions to some of the real challenges that Scotland faces. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you very much, Claire. It is interesting when you talk about other areas throughout Scotland. I've been a member of Edinburgh Community Solar Cooperative for a number of years, which has worked in partnership with Edinburgh Council, and has also just been for its phase 3 successful for CARES funding. And you're correct that in Scotland, the Scottish Government has not supported cooperatives and particularly community energy. And I think we all welcome the Labour Westminster government just last week announcing £1 billion for community energy. And I think that is a really step forward, and there's a real challenge, I would suggest, Claire, as you said, for the new Scottish Parliament to have cooperative MSPs, Labour and cooperative MSPs, to push forward that community energy, not just in certain parts of the country, but throughout Scotland. And I think it's really, really important, particularly with the money and the commitment being put forward by the Westminster government. Could I suggest the next speaker? I'm assuming that Paul Sweeney is here. I'm hoping that Paul is here. And Paul, thank you for coming. And you're going to talk about the cooperative economy. So over to you, Paul.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the invitation to come along and speak tonight. And I think this is a crucial election for cooperators across Scotland. We know that we have a number of significant challenges in our country. There was a focus group from More in Common out just in the last day or so, where people are just so scunnered, alienated, feeling like nothing is improving. And I think a large part of that is a feeling of a loss of control. And when you start to drill into what that really means in terms of our economy, I think it can be quite clearly illustrated in the fact that Scotland actually is one of the most foreign-owned countries in the world, and we've allowed that situation to play out slowly but surely over a 60-year period, essentially. And if you compare our gross national product, or gross domestic product rather, to gross national income, in the last year, records were recorded in Scotland in 2021. £36.5 billion was extracted from the Scottish economy, largely in the form of profits and dividends to foreign companies and shareholders, while only £26.4 billion flowed into Scotland, largely as foreign investment income. And that's a net outward flow of the entire GDP of Scotland. It's the most of any developed country, which isn't actually an outright tax haven. So I think that just illustrates the significant challenge that we have, but yet it's not discussed in Scottish politics whatsoever. We really don't often talk about it. In fact, we celebrate foreign direct investment as a universal good thing. We just talk about it in this idea that it's a positive metric, when actually you really need to scrutinise it. And a large part of it is buying up Scottish-owned assets and taking that control out of Scotland. And of course, there was a good example of that just a couple of years ago in Glasgow with community-owned housing, where one of the pioneer housing associations in the city, Reid Vale, was threatened with a takeover by a London-based housing conglomerate, which would have not only stripped around £800 million of housing out of the city, sorry, £180 million of housing out of the city, which was owned by that community. It would also have lost control from the community. It would have diluted the accountability that the local community felt they had with the housing association and its local management team. So I've been able to successfully resist that is exactly what we are in the business of here as co-operators, to sustain and build what we have in this country. And we do have a great history, a cooperative history in Scotland, with already in Scotland 600 cooperatives generating nearly £2 billion per year in revenue, with 700,000 members. So the equivalent of the population of Glasgow, really, are co-op members in Scotland one way or another, through a housing co-op or through their co-op society. So I think it's important we recognise the strong base we have in Scotland relative to other parts of the UK, where you're more likely to be a credit union member or a member of a cooperative. We can double the size of that sector in the next Parliament, and that's our commitment with this manifesto. And I think I've outlined why it's so important, because the government clearly has no growth plan in Scotland. They just think that by selling off more assets to foreign ownership, which we just heard from Claire about in energy, that's somehow going to magically improve things. It's going to improve our prosperity, and it's going to give people a feeling of control. It doesn't. It's actually an extremely one-dimensional and superficial approach to wealth generation. And it also undermines our democracy, because we're increasingly in the hawk to decisions made in foreign boardrooms with no accountability. We saw that in Glasgow in recent years with the closure of McVitie's, which was a Scottish company making biscuits that ended up in Turkish ownership, and then it was closed and it no longer has a presence in our country. So we need to stop this, and we need to turn it around, and we have to build it from the ground up. And we do that through extending cooperative control. We tried and fought valiantly as cooperators to get amendments into the Community Wealth Building Bill recently. We've got a couple of successes, but we haven't gone anywhere near far enough. If we were in government, we could seriously take that to the next level. And I think that's why this manifesto policy recommendation is so important, that we have that growth mandate across all government delivered business support services, that we can actually put it on the mission statement of the public sector in Scotland to grow cooperative development, to look at the purchasing power of the state. Think about food. The NHS in Scotland spends tens of millions of pounds in food every year. What could we do if we drove that into food cooperatives, if we drove that capacity into our urban development? Similarly in housing, one of the big challenges we've got in Scotland is a housing emergency. What can we do with the extension of community-based cooperatives and housing associations if we could scale that up like we did in the 1970s? What more could we achieve, not just in terms of building housing stock, but also in terms of forming good democratic units with sense of control over a fundamental part of someone's quality of life, their housing. So these are all at the heart of what we're trying to do. It's not just some sort of nerdy economics exercise. It's about well-being and social improvement and improving well-being. We know that Scotland has huge social challenges with years of early life, years of healthy life expectancy on the decline, with people feeling ever more alienated, with deaths of despair rising. The roots of improvement are in the housing cooperative, the energy cooperative, and the retail cooperative that we can build in Scotland. And that's exactly what we are in the business of trying to achieve if we are successful in this election. There's a great series of recommendations in doubling the cooperative sector in Scotland. not just in those that I mentioned, but also thinking about our universities and how we could drive growth in high technology and exports. A good example we've got in Scotland is Clansman Dynamics in East Kilbride, which is a high technology manufacturing business that's employee owned and is governed by its employees, a true workers' cooperative. We could do so much more with that in Scotland. One of the beauties of that model as well, it's very difficult to have it fall into foreign ownership, which is what happens too often with Scottish industries, Scottish technologies. They grow to a certain level and then they end up in foreign control, and not, usually not long after they then end up closing and moving overseas. So I think that's something we can really address here, and it's a really great story to tell. It's a great story about our pride in our communities, our ambition for Scotland, our pride in Scotland, and our pride and hope for the future, that we can actually give people a real set of positive instructions about how we can grow the Scottish economy and give people a sense of control back, which is what is sorely needed in our country today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. I think it's almost worth repeating that I think most people aren't aware in Scotland that we do have a historic cooperative tradition. And we have, as you said, Paul, 600 cooperatives gathering 1.9 billion per annum in revenue and serving 700,000 members here in Scotland. And just imagine what we could do in the next 5 years by doubling those number of cooperatives. And I think, as you said, it's really important for the elections, after the elections, to have a Scottish government will take a leading role in working towards a cooperative and doubling the number of cooperatives and leading the way in Scotland in terms of cooperatives. And I think the support from the community and from the ground up is so important. Could I now ask our last speaker, and I hope I'm going to get this pronunciation right, is Kienda Manji, who's going to speak about empowering communities. I hope I got that right. Just about.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Leslie. It's Kienda Manji, and I am delighted to be here. I am the Scottish Labour Co-op candidate for Stilling, and I am incredibly proud to have been given this opportunity to talk to you about communities and the element of our platform, which is about communities, which actually, when you look at it and when you think about it, is everything. Cooperatives start and end with communities. It is the underpinning of everything that we do. Cooperatives exist to support the community and to build power and hold wealth within communities. But communities are also the enabler of so many of the other things that Paul and Claire have already talked about, whether that be building the economy and ensuring that wealth is held locally and appropriately, or whether that is about enabling communities to generate their own energy and become more self-sufficient. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here. What we have seen since the Community Empowerment Act is actually a real dialing back of devolution. We have seen a centralisation of power away from communities, which has really run against the grain of what that policy was supposed to do. And what that has seen in real terms is a 7.8 billion net loss to local authority funding since 2015. We need more devolution and not less. And it doesn't need to stop at local authorities. It needs to go much further. But where we have found ourselves is that the great enabler of community empowerment, which is our local authorities who are connected to our communities, have been forced into a situation where they are doing community asset transfer and other elements of the Community Empowerment Act under duress. And that has meant that it has been a divestment of community assets rather than an investment in communities and an empowerment of those communities to be able to hold those assets for all of us. And I think there are huge potentials for a cooperative model that empowers local governments and sees that power being ceded and devolved further into communities. I think what we have seen is that there have been some great examples of community asset transfer done well. And you can see some examples of these in the recently published Our Community Scotland publication from the Scottish Co-op, where that has been handled well and the community have had a meaningful stake and have been able to do amazing things to support those local communities. However, when that support is not available, we have seen real community groups actually struggling to be able to deliver the empowerment that they have envisaged. And what we have seen is an incredibly inequitable distribution of that community empowerment. So communities that are well off and have resources and have assets to begin with become richer in those assets, and those that don't to begin with become poorer in those assets, or are left with a community liability and left to manage that out of their own back and with their own resources, which can be incredibly disempowering and is the opposite of the sort of vision that we want to see. And for me, it is nothing short of transformation in our communities. It is about ensuring that our communities are connected to each other, and that feeds into all elements of policy. That feeds into education, that feeds into health and social care, and ensuring that older people have a place to go and a way to contribute. So for me, community empowerment starts and ends with cooperatives, and I'm absolutely delighted to be introducing this element of the policy platform today. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. That's great, because I think over the last 2 decades, many of us who live we all live in local communities, have seen much of the power and responsibility within a local community being taken away and centralised. Everything has been centralised into the Scottish Government rather than actually decision making at a local level. So I think all of us want to see a Scottish Parliament after May with a Labour government to actually deliver, not just have policy documents that then don't deliver. And I think the important point is about the cooperative and being able to match the Westminster government of doubling the size of the cooperative economy. And importantly, in order to keep the wealth locally, and local decision making at a local level is a really, really important in that development. So I would thank you for all the speakers this evening, and I would urge you to download the Cooperative Direction for Scotland by the Scottish Labour Party, Scottish Co-operative Party, and I look forward to a great election result for both Labour and the Cooperative Party in the delivery of the cooperative policy documents that you will download this evening. And I look forward to the May elections, and looking forward to a Labour government in Scotland as well as in Westminster. Good evening.